The studio lights glowed softly over the familiar Tonight Show stage. But tonight, everything felt different. It was May 1992, Johnny Carson's final night as host after an unforgettable 30-year reign. Millions across America tuned in, knowing they were about to witness history. Some watched from their living rooms, some from hospital rooms, some from bars and restaurants that had turned the night into a national event. It wasn't just a TV show. It was the end of an era. Johnny walked onto the stage with his classic charm, waving to the cheering crowd. His smile was warm, but behind it sat a quiet heaviness, like a man saying goodbye not just to a job, but to a lifelong friend. The audience could feel it. The crew could feel it. Even Johnny himself struggled to hide the emotion creeping up his throat. He adjusted his tie, gently tapped his cue cards, and began the monologue. The jokes landed perfectly, as always. The audience laughed loudly, grateful to hear that familiar rhythm one last time. But something in Johnny's voice trembled ever so slightly. Not enough for casual viewers to notice, but enough for his longtime fans to feel. As he finished the monologue, Johnny took a moment longer than usual to look around the studio. The iconic desk, the guest chair, the curtains, the band. Every part of this stage had been his second home, where he created magic night after night. Memories flashed through his mind. Legendary interviews, unforgettable laughs, heartwarming surprises, and moments that shaped American culture. Then, the applause settled. Carson looked up with gentle eyes and softly said, "Tonight is a special night for all of us." The audience fell silent. Everyone could sense that Johnny wasn't just hosting a show. He was closing a chapter of American television history. What neither the audience nor Johnny knew was that the most emotional moment of the evening was still ahead. A surprise guest was waiting backstage, someone whose voice would turn this farewell into one of the most unforgettable moments ever broadcast. A farewell so powerful, it would bring Johnny Carson to tears. And in a moment, the entire studio would fall silent as the special guest stepped onto the stage. The energy inside the studio shifted as Johnny Carson transitioned from his monologue to the guest segment. The applause faded into a warm, expectant hum. Everyone knew this episode would be different, slower, more sentimental, more human. Johnny leaned back in his chair, letting the moment breathe, his fingers lightly drumming on the desk he'd sat behind for nearly 3 decades. He smiled at the audience, but there was a softness in his expression now. "Tonight," he began, "we're joined by someone very special, someone who didn't want to miss this night." His voice wavered just slightly, enough for the crowd to sense something was coming, something that mattered deeply to him. Backstage, behind the famous blue curtains, Bette Midler stood silently, listening. She had performed on the greatest stages in the world, but tonight felt heavier. She knew what Johnny meant to America. More importantly, she knew what Johnny meant to her. Their friendship stretched back decades. Interviews, laughter, spontaneous songs. And now she was here to help send him off in a way no one would ever forget. She straightened her sparkling dress, took a deep breath, and waited for her cue. Meanwhile, Johnny continued speaking onstage, reminiscing about his early days. He told stories about the first set they used, the first joke that ever bombed, and the first time he felt like he truly belonged. The audience laughed, but their laughter carried a bittersweet note, a mix of joy and tenderness. Then Johnny paused, his expression shifting, and said softly, "Before we bring out our next guest, I want to say something." A hush washed through the studio. "For 30 years, he continued, I've had the privilege of sharing my nights with all of you. You've let me into your homes, your routines, your lives, and I will never forget that." His eyes glistened, just for a moment, before he smiled to lift the mood. "But tonight," he said, "tonight is about memories. And there's someone backstage who is part of some of my favorite ones." The crowd erupted with applause. Behind the curtain, Bette closed her eyes. "Here we go." The band struck the first note. The curtain began to part. And then, she stepped out. The audience gasped, then cheered, then rose to their feet for a roaring standing ovation. The cheering was loud, but Johnny barely heard it. His eyes lit up, his smile turning genuine for the first time that evening. He stood from behind his desk as Bette walked toward him with open arms. They hugged, long and warm, the kind of embrace shared between two people who had weathered decades of television together. "I wasn't going to miss this," Bette whispered into his ear, her voice thick with emotion. Johnny laughed softly. I should have known you'd be here. The audience continued cheering, some even wiping their eyes. They knew. Everyone knew. This wasn't just another celebrity guest. This was someone who represented the heart of Johnny Carson's era. A performer who captured the soul of the show's finest moments. When the applause finally settled, the two sat down, Johnny behind his desk, Bette in the guest chair, crossing her legs elegantly. You know, Bette teased, I was going to bring a going-away cake, but I figured you'd probably want something a little more meaningful. Johnny leaned forward. You being here is meaningful enough. The audience melted. They talked about their first interview, about the funniest moments they shared, about the time Johnny accidentally walked into her dressing room before a show and immediately backed out muttering apologies. Laughter filled the room again, easing the heaviness just enough to remind everyone. This was still The Tonight Show. But beneath the laughter, there was an undercurrent they couldn't ignore. This was the last time Johnny Carson and Bette Midler would sit across from each other like this, on this set, under these lights, with this audience. Then something happened. The crowd quieted. The band fell silent. Bette placed a hand on her knee, inhaled deeply, and looked straight into Johnny's eyes. Johnny, she said gently, before I say anything else, I want to give you something. Johnny blinked, unsure. Bette, what are you? She held up a hand, smiling softly. Trust me. The studio lights dimmed. A soft spotlight illuminated her. The audience could feel the shift, the emotional weight settling in the room like a warm blanket. A single note echoed from the band. And then, Bette Midler began to sing. Her voice, smooth, vulnerable, filled with decades of history, floated across the studio. Johnny's eyes widened. His mouth parted slightly. For a moment, he forgot about the cameras, the audience, the millions watching at home. It was just him and her. And the song. A song he loved. A song that would soon break him. Betty's voice trembled with emotion as she poured her heart into every word, every syllable. The studio was so silent, you could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. Bette wasn't just performing, she was saying goodbye, and the entire world felt it. But as the final notes echoed, Johnny Carson felt something rise inside him, something he had kept hidden for 30 years until this moment. The song that stopped the nation. The studio lights dimmed just a little, settling into that warm Tonight Show glow that always made the room feel more intimate than it really was. The audience sat on the edge of their seats, still buzzing from the moment Johnny Carson and Bette Midler had shared in the previous segment. They knew something rare was happening tonight, something unscripted, something real, and everyone could feel the emotional temperature rising. Johnny looked over at Bette with eyes that were softer than they had ever seen on television. For once, the king of late night seemed human, vulnerable, almost fragile. His farewell show wasn't just the end of a career. It was the end of an era. Bette sensed it. The way she looked at Johnny wasn't like a guest looking at a host. It was like a friend watching another friend face a moment he'd been avoiding for months. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and said softly, Johnny, I want to give you something. The crowd went quiet instantly. A stagehand rushed in a microphone stand, placing it carefully under the spotlight. The band, Doc Severinsen and the orchestra, leaned forward, waiting for the cue. But then Bette lifted her hand and said, No music. I want to do this, just my voice. The audience gasped. Even Johnny sat up straighter. You're going to sing a cappella? For me? He asked, his voice cracking at the edges. Bette nodded with a tiny smile, the kind you give someone you admire deeply. She stepped up to the mic, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, took a slow breath. The entire studio fell into absolute silence. Then she began, You're the wind beneath my wings. The moment the first line left her lips, Johnny's lips tightened, as if he were fighting something inside. The audience could see it. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't show business. This was goodbye. Betty's voice floated through the studio, raw, emotional, unshaken. It filled every seat, every corner, every silent breath of the crowd. Without the orchestra behind her, her voice felt impossibly pure, almost sacred. Johnny folded his hands. At first, he held them tightly, like he needed strength. But then, slowly, as if surrendering to the moment, he relaxed them. The camera zoomed in, and for the first time in his 30-year reign on television, Johnny Carson's eyes filled with tears, not the polite kind, Not the "I'll shrug this off in a second" kind, but real, unrestrained emotion. As Bette continued singing, she kept glancing at him, her voice trembling every time she caught the way he looked at her. It was gratitude. It was love. It was heartbreak. It was everything a man feels when he realizes something beautiful is ending forever. Her voice cracked gently on the next line. "Did you ever know that you're my hero?" The crowd began to sniffle. People wiped their eyes. Some held their breath because they didn't want to miss a single second. And Johnny, the man who had made America laugh for decades, the man who always kept emotion tucked behind wit and charm, let a single tear fall. The audience watched it happen in real time. A national moment. A moment that would replay 1,000 times in the years to come. Johnny looked down briefly, shaking his head as if overwhelmed. Bette stepped closer while still singing, her voice no longer just performing. She was comforting him. It was no longer host and guest. It was two artists, two legends, saying goodbye in the most honest way possible. By the time she reached the last line, "Thank you, thank you, thank God for you," Johnny Carson was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, clutching a handkerchief, tears slipping freely now. The audience stood up, slowly at first, then rising in unison, giving a standing ovation so thunderous the studio floor seemed to tremble. But Bette didn't bow. She didn't wave. She walked straight to Johnny, leaned down, and wrapped him in a hug. A long one. The kind of hug that says, "We will never have another moment like this again." And Johnny, America's most composed, most controlled host, held her like someone who didn't want to let go. The standing ovation continued. Some audience members cried openly. Camera operators swallowed hard and kept filming. This wasn't television anymore. This was history. The moment America fell silent. The applause after Bette's a cappella performance didn't fade quickly. It rolled across the studio like a wave, long and powerful, refusing to settle. People weren't just clapping. They were releasing emotions they didn't even know they were holding. For 30 years, Johnny Carson had been part of their lives, their homes, their late-night routines. And now, they were watching him break in the most human way possible. Johnny remained seated, still holding Bette's hands after their long embrace. His face carried a soft, exhausted tenderness, as if the weight of every memory, every show, every joke, every farewell had suddenly landed on his shoulders all at once. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure, but the crowd wasn't done. They cheered louder. Some yelled, "We love you, Johnny." Others simply wiped tears from their eyes. Johnny looked up at Bette, shaking his head in disbelief. "Bette, I don't know what to say," he whispered. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything, Johnny. Not tonight." Johnny let out a breath, a quiet exhale that sounded like surrender. The band, still stunned from the rawness of the moment, remained frozen. Doc Severinsen dabbed a tear at the corner of his eye. After decades of performing with Johnny, he knew what that look meant. This wasn't just a farewell episode. It was a closing chapter in television history. Bette finally stepped back toward her seat, but the connection between her and Johnny stayed alive in the air, an unspoken bond, witnessed by millions. Johnny straightened his jacket as best he could, but the emotion lingered in his posture. For a moment, he simply sat there, looking out at the audience. He took in every face, every pair of eyes that had watched him for years. Then he spoke. "You know," he began softly, "when you do a show like this, night after night, year after year, you don't really think about the end. You don't imagine how it will feel when it's finally time to say goodbye." The room stilled. "You tell yourself you'll be ready," he continued, "that you'll walk away with a smile and a joke and that charming Carson confidence." He paused, voice trembling slightly. "But the truth is, nothing prepares you for this." A hush fell over the audience. One of those rare silences where every person in the room stops breathing at the same time. Johnny leaned back in his chair and looked directly at Bette. "And then someone like her," he said, "someone so gifted, so full of heart, sings something that strips away all your defenses." He gestured toward Bette with appreciation and disbelief. "And suddenly you're just a man trying not to fall apart on national television." The audience laughed softly through their tears. Johnny smiled, a real one, fragile and warm. Bette placed a hand over her heart. Johnny continued, "Bette, you didn't just sing a song tonight. You gave me a farewell, a real one. Something I'll never forget." Bette's eyes glistened. Well, she said gently, after everything you've given us, it's the least I could do. The studio lights dimmed again, this time intentionally. It created a soft, golden halo around Johnny and Bette, making the atmosphere feel even more sacred. A stage manager stepped onto the set, whispering something to Johnny about the remaining segments. Johnny waved him off kindly. No, no, he said, refusing the cue cards. Not tonight. Tonight, we do this my way. The audience erupted. Johnny stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. He walked to the front edge of the stage, closer to the audience than he had ever been. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new weight, one of finality, reverence, and gratitude. For 30 years, he said, I tried to bring a little joy into your homes. A little laughter. A little escape. His eyes scanned the room. And you, every one of you, you allowed me to be part of your nights. Part of your families. Part of your memories. He swallowed hard. And that is the greatest honor of my life. A swell of applause rose again, louder, deeper, more emotional than any standing ovation he'd ever received. Bette watched from her chair, her chin trembling. She had never seen Johnny like this. No one had. When the applause finally softened, Johnny looked toward the band. Doc, he said, after all these years, play us something soft. Doc nodded, wiping his eyes again. You got it, Johnny. The band began a gentle instrumental piece, something nostalgic, something warm. Not a show tune, not an upbeat jazz number. Something tender, chosen specifically for this moment. Johnny stood center stage, soaking it all in. The lights, the music, the faces, the history. The Tonight Show wasn't ending with a joke. It wasn't ending with a monologue. It wasn't ending with comedy at all. It was ending with heart, with truth, with vulnerability, with a song that had cracked open a man who had spent decades smiling through everything. America wasn't watching a farewell. They were witnessing a legend lay down his crown. The goodbye he never wanted to say. The soft music from Doc Severinsen's band wrapped around the studio like a warm blanket. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of melody that sits quietly in your chest and becomes part of your heartbeat. Johnny Carson stood at center stage, staring out at the audience and knowing, truly knowing, that this was the last time he would ever stand in this spot as the face of The Tonight Show. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in vulnerability. For once, he wasn't the confident host who could turn any awkward moment into a punchline. Tonight, he was simply Johnny, a man bracing himself for a moment he had spent his life avoiding. The applause finally settled, but the emotion in the room stayed thick. Johnny took a slow step back toward his desk. His chair, the one he had sat in for decades, seemed almost symbolic now, like a throne he was about to abdicate. He ran his hand across the wooden edge, tracing memories that no one else could see. You know, he said with a small smile, this desk has heard more secrets than a confessional. The audience laughed gently, grateful he still had the strength to make jokes. Johnny continued, sitting here, I interviewed presidents, movie stars, musicians, astronauts, people who changed the world. He paused. But do you know who changed my world? He looked straight at the audience. You. A sudden burst of applause shook the room again. People stood, clapping through tears, some holding their hearts as if steadying themselves. Johnny held up his hand, motioning for them to sit. Thank you, thank you. But let me finish this before I completely lose it. Laughter rippled softly. Bette Midler watched him carefully, her eyes warm, her expression filled with respect. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was a witness to the most vulnerable moment of Johnny Carson's entire career. Johnny tapped the desk lightly. This place, this show, has been my home. And every night, when those curtains opened, I felt a thrill, like the first time. It never got old. He inhaled deeply. But I also learned something over the years. Something important. The studio leaned in. I learned that laughter is more than entertainment. It's healing. It's a way to cope when life feels too heavy. And if I managed to help even one person through a hard day, then I did my job. The room filled with a soft hum of emotion. People nodded. Some openly cried. Johnny's voice wavered again. And I know I'm supposed to walk out of here with the dignity of a television icon. He laughed weakly, wiping under his eye. But Bette kind of destroyed that plan. The audience roared in laughter. Bette lifted her hand in mock guilt. Sorry, Johnny. I don't do half measures. Johnny pointed at her playfully. And that is exactly why I adore you. Their shared smile was captured by all the cameras. It was one of those rare moments where viewers at home could feel the warmth radiating straight through their screens. Then Johnny grew quiet again. Tonight isn't just about saying goodbye, he said softly. It's about gratitude. To my team, my crew, my writers, and to my audience. You allowed me to be myself, flaws and all. He paused, remembering something. You know, people often ask me how I stayed grounded all these years. The truth is, I didn't always. He chuckled. There were days I felt overwhelmed. Days I felt lonely. Days I wondered if I was good enough. The admission stunned the room. Johnny Carson, America's comedic icon, once doubted himself? He nodded gently. But then I'd come here, he said, patting the desk again, and everything made sense. Because I knew I belonged here. With you. A long silence followed. Not awkward, but reverent. Then Johnny turned toward Bette. I want to say something to you, he said. Earlier, when you sang that song, you gave me a gift. One I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Bette swallowed, her eyes shimmering. Johnny, you've given me more than I could ever repay. He gestured toward her softly. Bette, you didn't need to be here tonight. But you chose to come. And you chose to stand with me in this moment. This moment that scares me more than anything. She placed a hand over her heart again. How could I not? Johnny, you were the soundtrack of America's nights. You made us laugh when we didn't want to. That matters. The audience applauded again, this time for both of them. Johnny closed his eyes for a second, gathering himself. When he opened them, he looked ready, but only just. I think, he said quietly, that we are nearing the part I've been dreading. A soft murmur spread across the studio. Johnny lifted his gaze to the audience one last time. Thank you, he said, for everything. For making this kid from Nebraska feel like he mattered. His voice cracked. Now let's finish this the right way. The camera zoomed in. Bette straightened in her seat. The audience held their breath. Johnny Carson was finally preparing to say goodbye. The final moments before the curtain fell. The studio air had changed, softened, thickened, charged with a sense of finality that everyone felt but no one wanted to acknowledge. Johnny Carson stood beside his desk, one hand resting on the familiar polished surface as if drawing strength from it. The warm golden lighting wrapped him like a gentle embrace, making him look both regal and heartbreakingly human. Bette Midler sat quietly nearby, watching him with a mixture of admiration, sadness, and something like protectiveness. She knew what these last minutes meant. Everyone did. The band had fallen silent. The cue cards were tucked away. Even the crew, usually bustling and whispering commands, had stilled, many hiding tears behind cameras and clipboards. Johnny took a slow breath. 30 years, he said softly. 30 years sitting here, and I still don't know how to end a show like this. A small laugh rose from the audience, gentle, respectful. Johnny smiled. You know, people assume I love goodbyes because I always made them look easy. The truth is, I hate them. I always have. His voice softened, almost confessional. I'm someone who likes to slip out quietly. You know, Irish goodbye. No big fuss, no dramatic moment. Just, poof, I'm gone. But then he looked directly into the camera. But you deserved more than that. The audience reacted immediately, warm applause, emotional sighs. Johnny continued. You welcome me into your homes every night. For some of you, I was the last voice you heard before falling asleep. What an incredible thing that is. What a privilege. He paused. And I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. Truly. The room was silent. Absolutely still. Then, Johnny turned toward Bette. I'm not done with you yet, he said, attempting a playful grin. The audience chuckled. Bette laughed softly. Johnny, what more can I do? I already made you cry once tonight. Johnny wagged a finger at her. You didn't make me cry. I was emotionally leaking. The audience broke into laughter. But then his face softened again. Bette, do you think you could give us one more moment? One more gift? Bette tilted her head. What did you have in mind? Johnny stepped back toward center stage and gestured for her to join him. Sing with me, he said gently. Just a little. Just enough to help me get through this. The surprise on Betty's face was genuine. Johnny Carson wants to sing? She asked dramatically. The audience roared. Johnny shrugged. Well, I didn't say I'd sing well. But then he added quietly, just stand with me. And that was enough. Bette rose from her chair and joined him in the soft spotlight. Doc Severinsen lifted his trumpet, glancing for Johnny's cue. Johnny nodded. Something simple, he said. Something comforting. Doc understood instantly. He played the first delicate notes of One for My Baby and One More for the Road. A classic. A goodbye song. Perfect. Bette looked at Johnny, waiting. Johnny inhaled. And then, very softly, very imperfectly, he sang the opening line. The audience froze. No one expected this. Johnny Carson, known for his jokes, his timing, his charm, was now singing a farewell song with a trembling voice that held 30 years of memories. Bette joined him, harmonizing around his fragile notes, supporting him like a friend holding someone up in their final steps of a long journey. The moment wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. It was real, and that made it unforgettable. Johnny's voice cracked halfway through. He laughed through it, wiping his eyes. Oh boy, he said. Sinatra can sleep peacefully. His title is safe. Bette squeezed his arm. The band played them gently to silence. Not a big ending. Not a dramatic flourish. Just a soft fade, like a sunset slowly dimming behind the horizon. When the music ended, Johnny looked at Bette. Thank you, he whispered, for helping me walk out of here with grace. She answered in the same soft tone. You walked in with grace, Johnny. You're just completing the circle. The audience clapped, a long, emotional applause that felt like a collective embrace. Johnny stepped forward again to address the viewers at home. I want to say something to those watching on television. For years, I came into your living rooms, sometimes making you laugh, sometimes making you groan, and sometimes, hopefully, making you feel a little less alone. He swallowed hard. Thank you for letting me in. He lifted the small stack of papers on his desk, the stack he'd always shuffle before a commercial break, and held them for the last time. I think this is the moment. Bette looked down, visibly emotional. Johnny took a deep breath. And so, good night. The audience erupted. But Bette wasn't done. She walked to him and whispered, Johnny, can I send you off with the last word? He nodded. She stepped into the spotlight, looked at him, and said, You are the wind beneath our wings. Johnny's face collapsed into tears he didn't hide this time, and the screen slowly faded, not to black, but to a soft, glowing image of Johnny smiling, waving, forever etched in America's memory. The farewell America will never forget. The cameras panned slowly across the studio one last time. The lights had dimmed, leaving a warm golden glow over the empty chairs, the polished desk, and the silent orchestra pit. The audience, still standing, applauded as if to physically hold onto the moment, unwilling to let it end. But all good things, especially legendary things, must eventually draw to a close. Johnny Carson took a final look around the set, letting every detail sink in. The curtains, the microphones, the chairs, the familiar props. Every item whispered memories of 30 years of laughter, tears, and countless unforgettable nights. For the man who had built a career on humor and composure, tonight had been different. Tonight, he had allowed himself to be fully human. Bette Midler stood nearby, her eyes glistening, silently acknowledging that the farewell she helped craft had transcended television. It wasn't just a show anymore. It was history, emotion, and legacy combined in one unforgettable evening. Outside the studio, millions of viewers across America sat in their living rooms, offices, and bars, holding on to every second. Across the nation, people cried, hugged their loved ones, or simply sat in stunned silence. News anchors interrupted programming to comment on the monumental event. Across social media and phone lines, remember, this was 1992. People shared their experiences of watching the final broadcast live. It was impossible not to feel the magnitude of the moment. Johnny finally approached the edge of the stage one last time. His voice, calm but tinged with emotion, spoke to the audience and the millions watching at home. For 30 years, I've had the honor of sharing these nights with you, he said. You welcomed me into your homes, your families, your lives. And for that, I can only say thank you. He paused, letting the words settle. A tear ran down his cheek, shining under the stage lights. This is not just my farewell, Johnny continued, but a tribute to every person who laughed, cried, or found a little comfort in this show. You made it possible. You made it meaningful. The orchestra played softly in the background, a gentle, nostalgic melody, as if underscoring the moment for eternity. Johnny took a deep breath, waved to the audience, and whispered, "Good night, and thank you for letting me be part of your lives." As he walked backstage, the audience erupted once more. Cameras captured the faces of fans, crew, and celebrities alike, all moved beyond words. It was more than applause. It was gratitude, love, and respect for a man who had shaped American television and the cultural landscape for generations. News outlets would replay the moment for weeks, and clips of Bette Midler's unforgettable performance alongside Johnny's vulnerability circulated endlessly. Johnny's farewell became a lesson in humility, grace, and the power of letting emotion show, even for someone as iconic as him. Decades later, people still remember the night when America collectively cried and smiled at the same time, when a legend stood down with dignity, when laughter and tears intertwined, creating a memory too powerful to ever fade. And so, Johnny Carson's last night became more than a television episode. It became a piece of history, a shared experience that united millions in admiration and emotion. If Johnny Carson touched your life, made you laugh, or inspired you, type "Thank you, Johnny" in the comments, and share this story with someone who needs to feel the magic of that night.